I was sitting on my back porch drinking my morning coffee when I noticed the fourth RV rolling past my property line in less than an hour, and something about it made my stomach drop. The sun was barely up over the pine trees that bordered my 30-acre plot in rural Washington County, Oregon, and I could hear voices carrying through the crisp autumn air. Lots of voices. Way too many voices for land that was supposed to be completely empty except for me. I set down my mug and walked toward the eastern edge of my property, following an old deer trail through the thick underbrush. What I found when I broke through the tree line made my blood run cold. There were at least 20 RVs and campers parked in neat rows across my meadow, with people cooking breakfast on portable grills, kids running around playing, and dogs barking. Someone had even set up a portable toilet station on my land. My private land that I had bought 3 years ago specifically because it was remote and peaceful. I stood there for a moment, completely stunned, trying to process what I was seeing. A middle-aged woman in a floral shirt and khaki shorts noticed me and waved cheerfully, like this was the most normal thing in the world. I walked over to her, my confusion quickly morphing into anger. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" She smiled brightly. "Oh, we're camping. The HOA has really outdone themselves this year. The amenities are fantastic and the price was so reasonable. $50 a night for a spot this size. We couldn't believe it when we saw the listing." My mind reeled. The HOA, what HOA? Her smile faltered slightly. "The Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. They sent out the email about the new camping program 3 months ago. We booked our spot right away because we heard it would fill up fast." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice getting harder. "This is my private property. I never authorized any camping program." The woman's face went pale. "But we paid. We have receipts. There's a woman named Patricia who runs the whole thing. She checked us in yesterday afternoon and everything." Patricia. I knew that name. Patricia Henderson was the president of the Riverside Estates HOA, which governed the small planned community about 2 miles down the road from my property. I had specifically bought land outside of that community because I wanted nothing to do with HOAs or their ridiculous rules. My property was completely separate, unincorporated land with no HOA ties whatsoever. "Where is this Patricia now?" I asked. The woman pointed toward a large white RV at the far end of the meadow. "That's her command center. She's usually there in the mornings." I thanked her tersely and made my way across the field, my anger building with each step. People were staring at me now, picking up on the tension. When I reached the white RV, I pounded on the door harder than I probably should have. A woman in her early 50s opened the door, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression immediately suspicious. "Can I help you? Are you Patricia Henderson?" "I am, and you are Robert Garrison, the owner of the land you're currently running a campground on." Her face didn't show a flicker of concern, which only made me angrier. "Mr. Garrison, I'm not sure what you think is happening here, but this land falls under the jurisdiction of the Riverside Estates HOA. We have every right to utilize it for community purposes." I actually laughed at the absurdity of her statement. "You have absolutely no right. I own this land. I have the deed. I pay the property taxes. This has nothing to do with your HOA." Patricia stepped down from the RV, pulling the door closed behind her. She was a tall woman, probably 5'10", and she used her height to try to intimidate me. According to our records, this land was part of the original Riverside Estates development plan. When the previous owner defaulted on their HOA dues 12 years ago, the rights to this property reverted to the association. "That's not how property ownership works," I said flatly. And even if it were, I bought this land 3 years ago with a clear title. The title company did a full search. There were no liens, no claims, nothing. This is my property, free and clear. I think you'll find that our legal team has a different interpretation, Patricia said with a thin smile. Now, if you don't mind, I have campers to attend to. If you have an issue, I suggest you take it up with the HOA board at our next meeting. Third Thursday of every month, 7 p.m. at the community center. She turned to walk away and I grabbed her arm, not hard, just enough to stop her. You need to shut this down, now, today. Get these people off my property. Patricia looked down at my hand on her arm with such disdain you would have thought I had just spat on her. Take your hand off me immediately, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for assault. I let go, but I didn't back down. Call them, please. I would love to have the police here to explain to you that you're trespassing on private property and running an illegal commercial operation without the owner's permission. Fine. Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed. I stood there and waited, my arms crossed, as she spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, hello. I need an officer at the Riverside Estates community camping area. We have a very aggressive man here who physically grabbed me and is threatening our campers. The lies came out of her mouth so smoothly that I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. When she hung up, she looked at me with that same smug smile. They'll be here in 15 minutes. I suggest you leave before they arrive or you'll be the one getting arrested. I'm not going anywhere. This is my property. We stood there in tense silence, staring each other down while curious campers watched from a distance. True to the dispatcher's word, a sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later, his cruiser bumping across the meadow. He was a younger guy, maybe late 20s, with a name tag that read Deputy Morris. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" he asked, looking between us. Patricia immediately launched into her version of events, painting me as an unstable aggressor who had assaulted her and was threatening peaceful campers. I waited until she was done, forcing myself to stay calm. "Deputy, my name is Robert Garrison. I own this land. I have the deed at my house, which is about a quarter-mile that way." I pointed toward my property. "This woman and her HOA have set up an illegal camping operation on my private property without my knowledge or permission. They've been charging people $50 a night to camp here. I just found out about it this morning." Morris looked at Patricia. "Is that true? You've been charging people to camp here?" "The Riverside Estates HOA has every legal right to operate this camping program," Patricia said firmly. "This land falls under our jurisdiction according to our bylaws and the original development agreement." "You have documentation of that?" Morris asked. "At the HOA office, yes." Morris turned to me. "And you have your deed at my house. I can have it here in 10 minutes. Okay. Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to provide me with your documentation and we're going to sort this out. In the meantime, everyone stays calm. No more physical contact, no more threats. Understood?" We both agreed, and I jogged back to my house to grab my deed and title documents. My hands were shaking with adrenaline as I pulled them from my filing cabinet. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. When I got back to the meadow, Patricia was still standing by her RV with Deputy Morris, and she had a manila folder in her hands. "Let's see what we have," Morris said, taking both sets of documents. He spread them out on the hood of his cruiser and studied them for several minutes. I watched Patricia's face, looking for any sign of concern, but she maintained that same infuriating confidence. Finally, Morris looked up. "Okay, Mr. Garrison, your deed is clear and registered with the county. This property is definitely yours. Miss Henderson, what you've shown me is the original Riverside Estates development plan from 1998, but this particular plot was never actually part of that development. It was purchased separately by a family named Morrison in 2003 and then sold to Mr. Garrison in 2022. The HOA has no legal claim to this land. I felt a surge of vindication, but Patricia didn't even blink. I believe you're mistaken, Deputy. Our legal team has assured us that this land falls under our jurisdiction. I'm going to need to contact our attorney before we make any changes to our operations. Madam, this isn't a matter of opinion. This is a matter of legal property ownership. These people are camping on private property without the owner's permission. That's trespassing. Our campers have paid for their spots, Patricia said, her voice getting sharp. They have contracts. We can't just kick them out. You're going to have to, Morris said. And you're going to need to refund their money. Mr. Garrison, do you want to press charges for trespassing and fraud? I thought about it for a moment. These campers were victims in this situation, not criminals. But Patricia. She had knowingly set this up, lied to people, taken their money, and used my property for profit without my permission. I want charges filed against Patricia Henderson and any other HOA board members involved in this scheme. The campers need to leave, but they were deceived. I don't want them charged with anything. Patricia's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. We were acting in good faith based on our legal counsel's advice. Madam, you'll have a chance to explain all of that to a judge, Morris said. He called for backup, and within 30 minutes, 2 more deputies had arrived. Morris began the process of informing the campers that they needed to pack up and leave, while another deputy started taking statements. Patricia was read her rights and placed in handcuffs, still protesting the entire time. The campers were understandably upset. Many of them had taken time off work and driven hours to get here. Some had paid for multiple nights. I felt terrible for them, even though none of this was my fault. I watched as families packed up their gear, kids crying, parents angry and confused. One man, probably in his 60s, came up to me as he was loading his camper. I don't blame you, he said. This isn't your fault, but that HOA owes me $300. I paid for a week. I'm going to make sure you get your money back, I told him. All of you. I'll follow this through the legal system if I have to. It took the rest of the day for the meadow to clear out. Deputy Morris stayed for most of it, making sure everything remained peaceful. When the last RV finally pulled away, leaving deep tire tracks in my grass, I stood there surveying the damage. There was trash everywhere, trampled vegetation, and those portable toilets still standing like ugly monuments to Patricia's audacity. Hell of a day, Morris said, walking up beside me. You have no idea. I woke up thinking it would be a normal Saturday. Look, I've got to tell you this probably isn't over. HOAs can be really aggressive when they think they're right, even when they're clearly wrong. You might want to get a lawyer. Already planning on it. Morris handed me his card. Call me if anyone from that HOA shows up here again, and you might want to post some no trespassing signs, just to make it crystal clear. After Morris left, I went back to my house and started making calls. First to a lawyer friend who referred me to someone who specialized in property law. Then to my insurance company to document the damage to my land. Then to a sign company to order heavy-duty no trespassing signs. I was exhausted, angry, and still in disbelief that any of this had happened. The next morning, Sunday, I was out in the meadow picking up trash when a car pulled up. It was a silver BMW, and a man in an expensive suit got out. He was probably in his 40s with perfectly styled hair and a leather briefcase. "Mr. Garrison," he called out. "That's me. My name is Stephen Fletcher. I'm the attorney for the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" Your client committed fraud and trespassing. There's nothing to talk about." Fletcher walked closer, his shoes completely wrong for the muddy field. "I understand you're upset, and I want you to know that the HOA board had no intention of violating your property rights. This was all based on a genuine misunderstanding of the property boundaries." "A misunderstanding?" "Your president looked at my deed and still insisted she had the right to be here." "Patricia can be a bit overzealous," Fletcher admitted with a practiced smile that probably worked wonders on juries. "But I assure you, the board was acting on legal advice that turned out to be incorrect. We're prepared to make this right. We'll refund all the campers, we'll pay for any damage to your property, and we'll issue a formal apology. All we ask is that you drop the charges against Patricia." "No." Fletcher's smile didn't waver. "Mr. Garrison, I don't think you understand the resources the HOA has at its disposal. We have a legal fund of over $200,000. If this goes to court, we can make it very expensive and very time-consuming for you. Even if you win, which you would, it could take years and cost you tens of thousands in legal fees. Why put yourself through that when we can settle this right now?" I stopped picking up trash and stood up straight, looking him directly in the eye. "Because your client broke the law. She didn't make a mistake. She deliberately set up a business operation on my property, lied to people, took their money, and when I confronted her, she lied to the police about me assaulting her. That's not a misunderstanding. That's criminal behavior. And I'm not going to let it slide just because you have a big legal budget." Fletcher's expression finally hardened. "You're making a mistake." "I don't think so. Now get off my property." He left, but I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Sure enough, over the next 2 weeks, I was bombarded with letters from Fletcher's law firm, each one more threatening than the last. They claimed I was damaging the HOA's reputation with false accusations. They claimed I was interfering with their business operations. They even tried to argue that my property was creating a public nuisance by not being properly maintained according to community standards, despite the fact that I wasn't part of their community. I forwarded everything to my own attorney, a sharp woman named Michelle Torres who had practiced property law for 20 years. She was in her 50s, tough as nails, and she thought the whole situation was outrageous. "They're grasping at straws," she told me during one of our meetings at her office in downtown Portland. "Everything they're sending is just posturing. They know they don't have a case. They're hoping to intimidate you into dropping the charges. It's not working." "Good. Because I've been doing some digging, and this gets more interesting. The Riverside Estates HOA has been operating in the red for the past 3 years. They've had some expensive legal battles with residents, some failed community projects, and their reserve fund is depleted. I think Patricia saw your land as a way to generate income and didn't care that she had no right to it. So this was just about money, isn't it always?" Michelle leaned back in her chair. "Here's what I think happened. Patricia probably did consult with Fletcher's firm, but I doubt she told them the whole truth. She probably showed them that old development plan and asked if they could make a case for HOA jurisdiction. They probably told her it was a long shot at best. But Patricia heard what she wanted to hear and ran with it. Now Fletcher is stuck trying to defend the indefensible. What about the criminal charges? That's moving forward. The district attorney's office is taking it seriously. Patricia is being charged with fraud, trespassing, and operating a business without proper licensing. The HOA board is also being investigated to see if anyone else knew what was going on. There should be a preliminary hearing in about 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks were some of the strangest of my life. I became a minor celebrity in the local news when a reporter got hold of the story. Local man discovers HOA running illegal campground on his property was the headline that ran in the Portland Tribune. From there, it got picked up by some national news sites and even a few HOA horror story blogs. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, which I mostly declined. I just wanted this to be over, but the attention did have one benefit. Several of the campers who had been defrauded reached out to me, and we formed a group to make sure everyone got refunded. The HOA was dragging their feet on returning the money, claiming they needed to do a full audit first. I also started getting threatening letters from individual HOA members, people who blamed me for causing problems and costing them money. One letter, from a woman named Deborah Winters, was particularly nasty. She claimed I was lying about owning the property and that I was just a troublemaker trying to destroy their community. She said I should be ashamed of myself for getting Patricia arrested when she was just trying to provide affordable recreation options for families. The mental gymnastics were astounding. About a month after the initial incident, I was at home when I heard vehicles on my property again. My heart sank. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, ready to call Deputy Morris, but what I found wasn't campers. It was a work crew setting up construction equipment. "What are you doing?" I called out to a man in a hard hat. "We're here to start clearing the land for the community park," he said, checking his clipboard. "The HOA contracted us to remove the trees and level this area. Stop. Right now. Stop everything." The man looked confused. "Is there a problem? This is my private property. The HOA has no authority to build anything here. Who hired you?" He showed me the work order, and sure enough, it was signed by Patricia Henderson, dated 2 weeks ago before her arrest. She had approved this project knowing full well it was illegal, and she had done it on purpose. This was retaliation. I called Michelle immediately, and she called the contractor's company. The work crew packed up and left within an hour, but the damage was done. They had already started cutting down several trees on the edge of the meadow. More destruction of my property, more costs, more evidence of the HOA's complete disregard for the law. Michelle filed an emergency motion for a restraining order against the HOA and all of its board members, prohibiting them from entering my property or authorizing any work on it. The judge granted it within 2 days, but Patricia still wasn't done. She started showing up at the property line, just barely on the public road that bordered my land, and taking photographs. When I confronted her, she claimed she was documenting the poor condition of my property for code enforcement. "You're not a code enforcement officer," I said. "And even if you were, my property isn't in your jurisdiction." "We'll see what the county has to say about that," she replied with that same smug expression. She actually did file complaints with the county, claiming my property was a fire hazard because of dead trees, a health hazard because of standing water where I had a natural pond, and a nuisance because of noise from the wildlife. Every single complaint was investigated and dismissed, but it took time and energy to deal with each one. I started to understand what Deputy Morris had meant. This was harassment, pure and simple, and Patricia was relentless. The preliminary hearing finally arrived in late November. I sat in the courtroom with Michelle on one side and Deputy Morris on the other. Patricia was there with Stephen Fletcher, looking perfectly composed in a navy blue suit. Several HOA board members were also present, including a man named Gary Sutton, who was the vice president, and Deborah Winters, the woman who had sent me that nasty letter. She was the treasurer. The prosecutor was a young woman named Amanda Price, who had a reputation for being thorough and aggressive. She laid out the case methodically, presenting evidence of the camping operation, the money collected, the lack of any legal right to use the property, and Patricia's lies to the police. She also introduced evidence of the attempted construction project and the ongoing harassment. Fletcher tried to argue that this was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and that Patricia had genuinely believed she had the authority to use the land. But it fell flat when the prosecutor showed emails between Patricia and other board members, where she explicitly acknowledged that the property might not be under HOA control, but decided to proceed anyway. One email, sent from Patricia to Garrison, read, "Even if there's some question about our legal right to the land, by the time Garrison figures it out and gets a lawyer, we'll have generated enough revenue to handle any legal costs, worth the risk." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Barbara Reeves, read the email twice before looking at Patricia with obvious disapproval. "Miss Henderson, this email suggests you knowingly proceeded with this camping operation despite being aware that you might not have legal authority." "Is that accurate?" Fletcher tried to interject, but the judge cut him off. "I'm asking your client, counselor." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, that email was taken out of context. I was simply being cautious and considering all possibilities." "It reads to me like you were planning to commit fraud and deal with the consequences later," Judge Reeves said. "I'm binding this case over for trial. The defendant will remain free on her current bail conditions, but I'm also adding a condition that she is to have absolutely no contact with Mr. Garrison or his property, directly or indirectly. If I hear she's violated that order, I'll revoke bail immediately. Am I understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly, the first time I had heard her sound anything less than confident. As we left the courthouse, Gary Sutton approached me. He was a tall man in his early 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. "Mr. Garrison, could I speak with you for a moment?" Michelle put a hand on my arm, cautious, but I nodded. "It's fine." Gary looked genuinely distressed. "I want you to know that most of the board had no idea what Patricia was doing. She told us she had secured legal access to some additional land for community use, but she never told us it was your property or that she was charging people to camp there. When we found out what really happened, several of us called for her resignation, but she refused to step down." "What about that email?" I asked. "She sent it to you." Gary's face reddened. "I never read it carefully. She sends dozens of emails a day about various HOA business. I skimmed it and thought she was talking about negotiating to purchase some land, not just taking it. I should have paid more attention. I'm sorry. We're trying to remove her from the board, but our bylaws make it very difficult to remove an elected president before their term ends. You need to fix your HOA," I said. "This isn't just about Patricia. Your whole system is broken if one person can cause this much damage." "I know. We're working on it." Over the next few months, as the case moved toward trial, I watched the Riverside Estates HOA implode from a distance. Gary and 2 other board members managed to suspend Patricia's authority, though they couldn't remove her from the position. Deborah Winters resigned as treasurer when it came out that she had helped Patricia set up the bank account where the camping fees were deposited. Several residents sued the HOA over mismanagement of funds, and the whole community was in chaos. Meanwhile, the campers were still fighting to get their refunds. The HOA claimed they couldn't refund the money because Patricia had spent most of it on legal fees and the construction project that never happened. Some of the campers filed small claim suits. Others just gave up, writing off the loss. I felt responsible, even though I knew logically that I wasn't. These people had been victimized by Patricia's scheme, and they were suffering because of it. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. I contacted each of the campers I could find and offered to refund their money myself, with the understanding that I would seek reimbursement from the HOA or Patricia eventually. Michelle thought I was crazy. "You're not obligated to do this. You were a victim too." "I know. But these people took their kids camping. They were just trying to have a nice vacation. They don't deserve to lose money because Patricia is a con artist." I ended up refunding almost $8,000 to 17 different families. It hurt my savings, but it felt like the right thing to do. And the gratitude I received from those families made it worth it. Several of them wrote me thank you letters that I kept in a folder. One family even sent me a gift basket. The trial was scheduled for March, a full 6 months after the initial incident. Patricia's lawyers tried multiple times to get the charges dismissed or reduced, but Judge Reeves wasn't having it. As the trial date approached, Fletcher finally came to Michelle with a plea deal proposal. They want Patricia to plead guilty to misdemeanor fraud and trespassing in exchange for probation and restitution, Michelle explained during a meeting at her office. No jail time. She'd have to resign from the HOA board, pay back all the camping fees, and compensate you for the property damage. They're estimating the total at around $15,000. What do you think? I think it's not a bad offer, honestly. If we go to trial, we'll probably win, but there's always risk. And even if she's convicted on all charges, she might not get much jail time anyway. First offense, white-collar crime, community leader reputation. Judges can be lenient. But she'd have a felony conviction if we go to trial, right? Probably, yes. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to see Patricia face maximum consequences for what she had done. But another part of me was just tired. This had consumed 6 months of my life. I wanted it to be over. And if Patricia had to plead guilty, resign from the HOA, and pay restitution, that was something. What about Deborah Winters? I asked. She helped set up the bank account. She knew what was happening. The DA is offering her a deal too, community service and a fine. She's cooperating fully and turning over all the financial records. In the end, I agreed to the plea deal. Patricia Henderson stood in court on March 15th and admitted that she had fraudulently operated a camping business on property she did not own, had trespassed on private property, and had lied to law enforcement. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution to me, plus make full restitution to all the campers. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state of Oregon. Judge Reeves made sure that was part of the formal sentencing order. "Miss Henderson," the judge said, "you abused a position of trust in your community. You defrauded innocent people who believed you were acting in good faith. You violated Mr. Garrison's property rights repeatedly and flagrantly. You lied to law enforcement. And even after being caught, you continued to harass Mr. Garrison and violate court orders. Your behavior has been appalling from start to finish. You're fortunate that Mr. Garrison agreed to this plea deal, because if we had gone to trial, I would have had no mercy. If you violate any term of your probation, I will revoke it and impose the maximum jail sentence. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice barely audible. I watched her leave the courtroom with Fletcher, her shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt relieved that it was over, but it still wasn't quite over. The Riverside Estates, HOA, still owed me money, and they were claiming they couldn't pay because Patricia had drained their accounts. Michelle filed a civil suit against the HOA itself, arguing that they were liable for Patricia's actions because she was acting in her capacity as HOA president. That case took another 8 months to resolve. During that time, The HOA went through a complete leadership change. Gary Sutton became president and started the process of rebuilding. He actually reached out to me several times to apologize and to update me on their progress in reforming their governance. "We've completely rewritten our bylaws," he told me during one phone call. "We've added oversight requirements, financial controls, and a process for residents to remove board members who abuse their authority. We never want anything like this to happen again." "That's good," I said, "but your HOA still owes me money." "I know. We're working on it." We had to take out a loan to pay back all the campers, and we're still dealing with several lawsuits. But we're not trying to avoid responsibility. I promise we'll make this right. Gary was true to his word. The HOA eventually settled with me for $12,000, which covered most of my costs, but not everything. I had spent more than that on legal fees alone, but Michelle had worked out a payment plan that I could manage, and she had reduced her rates because she believed in the case. Patricia made her restitution payments on time, surprisingly. I heard through the grapevine that she had to sell her house and move to an apartment to afford it. Part of me felt bad about that, but mostly I just felt like justice had been served. She had caused real harm to real people, and there were consequences. The story didn't end there, though. About a year after the trial, I got a call from a reporter at a national news network who wanted to do a story about HOA abuse. They had found dozens of similar cases around the country where HOAs had overstepped their authority, harassed homeowners, or engaged in outright fraud. My case had become somewhat famous in anti-HOA circles online, and they wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the story aired on a Tuesday night in April, almost 2 years after I first discovered the campground on my property. The reporter, a serious woman named Jennifer Holt, interviewed me on my land, standing in the meadow where it all happened. She also interviewed several of the campers who had been defrauded: Gary Sutton from the reformed HOA board, Michelle Torres, and even Deputy Morris. The story was titled "When HOAs Go Rogue," and it sparked a national conversation about HOA oversight and accountability. Several states, including Oregon, started considering legislation to reform HOA laws and provide better protection for homeowners. I became, somewhat unwillingly, a voice in this movement. I was invited to speak at community meetings, to testify before legislative committees, and to write articles about my experience. I mostly declined, wanting to get back to my quiet life, but I did agree to a few speaking engagements because I believed the issue was important. During one of these events, a town hall in Salem about proposed HOA reforms, I met a woman named Cheryl Thompson, who had been fighting her own HOA for 3 years over a property line dispute. She was in her late 30s, worked as an environmental consultant, and had a sharp wit and fierce intelligence. We connected immediately over our shared experiences with HOA nightmares. We started dating a few months later, which was unexpected but welcome. Cheryl understood what I had been through in a way that most people couldn't. She had her own war stories about HOA board members who had harassed her, lied about her, and tried to fine her into submission over a fence that was 6 inches over the property line according to their surveyor, but not according to the county's official survey. They tried to put a lien on my house over 6 inches, she told me during one of our early dates. 6 inches. I spent $20,000 in legal fees fighting it, and I finally won, but they never apologized. They just moved on to harassing someone else. Why do people become HOA board members? I wondered aloud. What makes someone wake up and think, I want to spend my time making my neighbors' lives miserable? Power, Cheryl said simply. Some people crave it, and an HOA board is the only place they can get it. They become little tyrants ruling over their tiny kingdoms. By the time another year had passed, my life had returned to something resembling normal. The meadow had recovered from the damage. The trees I had replanted were growing, and I had installed a proper fence along my property line with large signs making it clear that this was private property and trespassing would be prosecuted. I never heard from Patricia again, though I occasionally saw updates about her online. She had moved to California and was working as a real estate agent, apparently having learned nothing from her experience. She still maintained that she had done nothing wrong, and that she was the real victim in the whole situation. Cheryl and I moved in together in the 4th year after the incident. She loved my property as much as I did, and we spent our weekends hiking the trails, maintaining the land, and enjoying the peace and quiet. No HOA, no board meetings, no one telling us what color we could paint our house or whether we could plant a garden. The Riverside Estates, HOA, under Gary's leadership, actually became a model for HOA reform. They were transparent with their finances, they involved residents in major decisions, and they focused on maintaining common areas rather than micromanaging individual properties. Gary reached out to me once more, about 5 years after everything happened, to invite me to speak at their annual meeting about the importance of good governance. I declined politely. I had no desire to set foot in that community ever again, but I appreciated that they were trying to do better. The legislation that had been prompted by my case, and others like it, passed in Oregon in the 6th year after the incident. The new law created an HOA oversight board at the state level, established strict financial transparency requirements, made it easier for homeowners to fight back against abusive HOAs, and created real penalties for HOA board members who violated the law. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Michelle Torres, who had become a good friend over the years, called me when the law passed. "You did this," she said. "You could have just accepted that plea deal and walked away, but you kept fighting and you actually changed things. You should be proud." "I just didn't want anyone else to go through what I went through," I said. "Well, because of you, they'll have better tools to fight back if they do." On the 7th anniversary of finding that illegal campground on my property, Cheryl and I got married in the meadow. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, with no HOA to tell us we couldn't. Gary Sutton actually sent a very nice gift and a card apologizing again for everything that had happened. I appreciated the gesture. Patricia Henderson was required to pay restitution for another 2 years after that, and according to the court records I checked, she made her final payment on time. Her probation ended, and she was free. I heard she wrote a blog post claiming she had been unfairly targeted and that she had only been trying to help her community. The comments were filled with people calling her out for lying, including several of the campers she had defrauded. I stopped following her after that. She wasn't worth the mental energy. My property became something of a sanctuary for me and Cheryl. We added a greenhouse, a small workshop, and a chicken coop. We planted fruit trees and a large vegetable garden. We built trails through the woods and installed bird feeders. We made it exactly what I had always wanted it to be. A peaceful place away from the chaos of the world, where no one could tell us what to do or how to live. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had bought this property specifically to avoid HOAs, only to end up in the biggest HOA nightmare imaginable. But in a strange way, it worked out. I met Cheryl through the experience. I helped create legal reforms that would protect other homeowners. I learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's expensive and exhausting, is worth it. I also learned to be vigilant. I checked my property regularly, installed security cameras, and made sure I knew exactly what was happening on my land at all times. I would never be caught off guard like that again. Deputy Morris, who had been promoted to sergeant, stopped by once in a while to check in. He had become interested in property rights issues after my case and had actually testified in favor of the HOA reform legislation. We became friendly over the years, and he and his wife even came to our wedding. "You know, your case is taught at the academy now," he told me during one visit. It's an example of how HOAs can go completely off the rails and how important it is for law enforcement to understand property rights and not just take someone's word for it because they're an HOA president. Patricia was pretty convincing at first, I admitted. She was. But the evidence was clear once we looked at it. That's the lesson. Always verify. Never assume someone in a position of authority is telling the truth. The campers from that original weekend became an unexpected part of my life, too. Several of them stayed in touch, updating me on their lives and thanking me again for refunding their money. One family, the Pattersons, even visited us a few years later and asked if they could camp on the property, this time with permission. "Only if you don't pay me," I said with a laugh. They spent a weekend there, and it was actually really nice. Their kids played in the meadow, we cooked out together, and they told stories about other camping trips they had taken. It felt like reclaiming that space from the negativity of what Patricia had done. As more time passed, the whole incident began to feel almost surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. But the legal documents were real, the fence was real, and the reformed HOA laws were real. It had happened, and it had changed my life in ways I never could have predicted. Cheryl and I talk sometimes about what would have happened if I hadn't gone outside that morning, if I hadn't followed the sound of voices to the meadow. Would Patricia have just kept running her illegal campground? Would she have expanded it? Would anyone have stopped her? "Someone would have eventually," Cheryl said, "but it probably would have taken a lot longer and she would have hurt more people." "I just wanted a quiet place to live," I said, "and you got it. Eventually." After fighting off a crazy HOA president, multiple lawyers, a construction crew, and countless headaches. When you put it that way, it sounds almost adventurous. "It was a nightmare," Cheryl corrected, "but you handled it perfectly. You stood your ground, you followed the law, and you didn't let them intimidate you. I'm proud of you for that." I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering if she had learned anything or if she still believed she was the victim. I thought about the HOA and how it had reformed itself under new leadership. I thought about the campers and whether they would ever trust another campground listing again. I thought about Deputy Morris and the changes in law enforcement training. I thought about Michelle Torres and how many other property owners she had helped over the years. But mostly, I thought about how lucky I was. Lucky to have found this property. Lucky to have fought back. Lucky to have met Cheryl. Lucky that the system, despite its flaws, had eventually worked the way it was supposed to. Lucky that I could sit on my porch, drink my coffee, and watch the sunrise over my own land without anyone telling me I couldn't. The meadow where the campground had been was now covered in wildflowers that Cheryl had planted. Every spring, they bloomed in brilliant colors, transforming the space completely. We liked to walk through them in the evening, talking about our days and making plans for the future. The scars from that incident had healed, leaving behind something beautiful. On quiet mornings when I was alone with my coffee and the sun was just coming up, I sometimes thought about that first moment when I saw the RVs in my meadow. The shock, the anger, the disbelief. I remembered how violated I felt, how powerless in the face of Patricia's confidence and her legal team's threats. But I also remembered making the decision not to back down, not to accept their explanations or their intimidation. That decision had cost me money, time, and peace of mind. But it had also given me something valuable. The knowledge that I could stand up to people who were wrong, even when they were powerful, even when they were confident, even when they had resources and lawyers and a whole organization backing them. I could stand up for myself and for what was right, and I could win. That was worth more than any amount of money or quiet mornings. And as I sat there, watching the sun rise over my land, my wife still asleep inside, my property secure and peaceful, I felt grateful for every moment of that terrible experience, because it had taught me who I was and what I was capable of. The HOA nightmare had ended, but the lessons remained. And I carried them with me, every single day, as I lived my life exactly the way I wanted to, on my own land, under my own rules, free from anyone who thought they had the right to tell me otherwise.